Begin Purpose Podcast, Episode 7, When Motivation Fades. How to Keep Going When the Journey Feels Harder Than It Did at the Beginning. Welcome back to the Begin Purpose Podcast. In our last episode, we talked about small actions and meaningful momentum. We explored the idea that lasting change rarely begins with one dramatic leap. More often, it begins with a small action repeated with enough intention that it starts to reshape the way we see ourselves. We talked about micro-wins, the quiet power of follow-through, and the importance of respecting the next meaningful step instead of dismissing it because it does not look big enough from the outside. Today, I want to talk about what happens after the first steps have been taken, because this is where many people quietly struggle. Beginning can be exciting. A new goal can bring energy. A fresh idea can make us feel alive. A new season can awaken hope. We imagine the better version of life we are moving toward, and for a while, the vision itself gives us momentum. But eventually, almost always, the emotional high begins to fade. The newness wears off. The work becomes ordinary. The progress feels slower than expected. Other responsibilities interrupt. The first burst of motivation disappears, and we are left facing the question that matters most in every meaningful journey. Will I continue when it no longer feels exciting? That moment is not failure. It is not a sign that the purpose was false. It is not proof that you chose the wrong path. It is simply the place where motivation hands the work over to commitment. Many people misunderstand motivation. They treat it as the engine of change, when often it is only the spark that helps us begin. It can wake us up, help us imagine a different future, and get us moving when we have been stuck. But motivation is not always steady. It rises and falls with energy, emotion, confidence, sleep, stress, weather, feedback, hormones, circumstances, and 1,000 other hidden influences. If we rely on motivation alone, then our growth will be as unstable as our moods. Purpose has to be deeper than motivation, because purpose is what remains when the feeling is gone. Think about any meaningful path in life. Marriage cannot survive on romance alone. Health cannot be built only on the days when exercise sounds appealing. A book cannot be written only when inspiration is flowing. A business cannot grow only when the work feels exciting. A life of faith, service, creativity, healing, or leadership cannot depend entirely on emotional readiness. Anything worth building will eventually require us to show up on days when the feeling is weaker than the commitment. That does not mean we should ignore our feelings. It does not mean we should force ourselves endlessly, pretend exhaustion is noble, or call burnout discipline. Begin Purpose is not about grinding ourselves into the ground. But there is a difference between honoring our limits and surrendering every time the feeling changes. There is a difference between needing rest and needing escape. There is a difference between adjusting the pace and abandoning the path. When motivation fades, the first thing we need is not shame. It is understanding. We need to recognize that the fading of motivation is a normal part of the process. The human brain responds strongly to novelty. New beginnings often feel emotionally charged because they carry possibility. But once the new thing becomes familiar, the emotion softens. The work becomes less dramatic. At that point, the question shifts from, "Am I excited?" to, "Is this still aligned?" If the answer is yes, then the work may need structure more than it needs excitement. This is where many people confuse boredom with a warning sign. They begin something meaningful, and once it becomes repetitive, they assume something is wrong. The diet becomes routine. The writing practice becomes ordinary. The therapy work becomes difficult. The business tasks become administrative. The relationship repair requires uncomfortable conversations. The spiritual practice feels less emotionally powerful than it did at first. And because it no longer feels inspiring, the person begins to wonder if they have lost their way. But repetition is not the enemy of transformation. Repetition is often the road transformation walks on. A person who wants to become healthier may not feel inspired by another ordinary walk, another balanced meal, another evening of going to bed on time. A person who wants to become a writer may not feel electrified by opening the document again and working through awkward sentences. A person trying to rebuild trust may not feel heroic during the quiet, repeated acts of reliability that slowly repair a relationship. Yet those ordinary actions matter. They are the bricks, they are the roots, they are the unseen structure beneath visible change. We often want transformation to feel dramatic because drama makes us feel like something important is happening. But some of the most important change feels quiet while it is happening. It feels like keeping a promise when no one applauds. It feels like choosing patience in a familiar situation where you used to react. It feels like returning after a discouraging week. It feels like doing the next right thing, even though the emotional fireworks are gone. That is why we need to build rhythms, not just chase feelings. A rhythm is a pattern that carries us when motivation is inconsistent. It does not have to be complicated. It may be a morning reflection, a weekly planning session, a daily walk, 10 minutes of writing, one honest check-in, one spiritual practice, one consistent act that keeps you connected to who you are becoming. A rhythm says, this matters enough to have a place in my life, even when my emotions are not loudly reminding me. The mistake many people make is building plans that require constant intensity. They create a routine that only works when they are highly motivated. They expect themselves to maintain the emotional energy of day one forever. Then, when real life returns, the plan collapses. A sustainable rhythm is different. It respects human limitations. It has room for tired days, busy days, imperfect days, and recovery days. It does not ask, what can I do when I am at my best? It asks, what can I continue when life is normal? That question is powerful. What can I continue when life is normal? Not when I am inspired, not when the schedule is perfect, not when everyone supports me, not when I feel completely confident. What can I continue in the actual life I am living? For some people, the honest answer may be smaller than they hoped. But smaller does not mean weaker. Smaller may be what makes consistency possible. If you cannot write an hour a day, write 10 minutes. If you cannot completely overhaul your health, choose one faithful health-supporting action. If you cannot fix a relationship overnight, begin with one honest conversation. If you cannot rebuild your entire life this month, create one practice that keeps you pointed toward the life you want. The size of the action matters less than whether it keeps you connected to direction. When motivation fades, another important question is, what story am I telling myself about this difficulty? Because the meaning we assign to struggle often determines whether we continue. If we interpret difficulty as proof that we are failing, we are more likely to quit. If we interpret difficulty as part of the process, we are more likely to adjust and keep going. Imagine someone who has begun a new habit. For 2 weeks, things go well. Then they miss 3 days. The old story says, you did it again. You never stick with anything. That story creates shame, and shame often leads to avoidance. But a more purposeful interpretation says, something interrupted the rhythm. What needs to be adjusted so I can return? That question creates movement. It turns a lapse into information rather than identity. This distinction matters because many people do not quit at the first obstacle. They quit at the first moment they interpret the obstacle as proof against themselves. The obstacle itself may be manageable. The interpretation becomes the heavier burden. If a person believes one missed day means they are undisciplined, they may give up. If they believe one awkward attempt means they are not capable, they may stop trying. If they believe slow progress means nothing is working, they may abandon something that simply needed more time. Purposeful people are not people who never struggle. They are people who learn how to relate to struggle differently. They begin to ask, what is this teaching me? Instead of only, why is this happening to me? They ask, what support do I need? Instead of only, why am I not stronger? They ask, what is the next honest step? Instead of, how do I fix everything immediately? These questions do not remove the difficulty, but they keep difficulty from becoming a dead end. There is also a season in every meaningful journey where progress becomes harder to see. Early progress can be noticeable because we are moving from nothing to something. The first steps feel obvious. But over time, growth becomes more layered. It may be happening beneath the surface. You may be becoming more patient, more aware, more disciplined, more courageous, but because the change is gradual, you may not recognize it day to day. Other people may not see it immediately either. This can be discouraging because we often want visible confirmation that the effort is working. But not all progress is visible in the moment. Some progress is internal before it becomes external. A person may spend months learning to speak to themselves differently before others notice a change in confidence. Someone may work quietly on emotional regulation before relationships visibly improve. Someone may practice a craft privately long before the work becomes ready to share. Someone may rebuild self-trust through small promises before any major life change occurs. The roots are growing before the fruit appears. That is why we have to learn how to measure progress in more honest ways. Not only did I reach the final goal, but also, did I return faster than I used to? Did I respond with more awareness? Did I keep a smaller promise instead of making another dramatic one? Did I ask for help instead of disappearing? Did I choose alignment in one place where I used to choose avoidance? These are signs of growth. They may not look impressive to the outside world, but they are deeply meaningful. When motivation fades, it can help to reconnect with the original why. Not in a vague, inspirational way, but honestly. Why did this matter to you in the first place? What pain were you trying to address? What hope were you trying to honor? What value was calling for more space in your life? What version of yourself were you trying to become? Sometimes we lose motivation because the work is hard. Other times, we lose motivation because we have become disconnected from meaning. We are doing the actions, but we have forgotten the reason. The task becomes mechanical. The routine becomes obligation. The purpose fades into the background. Reconnecting with why can restore depth, even if it does not restore excitement immediately. If you are writing, remember why your voice matters. If you are healing, remember what freedom might feel like. If you are rebuilding health, remember the life you want your body to help you live. If you are changing patterns in relationships, remember the kind of love and honesty you want to practice. If you are pursuing purpose, remember that your life is not meant to be lived only in reaction to demands. Meaning gives strength to repetition. Still, there are times when fading motivation is not simply normal resistance. Sometimes, it is a signal that something needs to be reevaluated. Maybe the pace is too intense. Maybe the method is not working. Maybe you are carrying someone else's expectations and calling them purpose. Maybe exhaustion is asking for care, not criticism. This is why reflection matters. We do not want to blindly continue everything simply because we started, but we also do not want to abandon everything simply because it became difficult. A helpful question is this hard because it matters, or is it hard because it no longer fits? That question may take time to answer. Some difficulty is the natural cost of meaningful growth. Other difficulty is the pain of misalignment. The difference often becomes clearer when we slow down enough to listen. If the path is difficult but still connected to your values, you may need support, patience, and a sustainable rhythm. If the path is difficult because it violates your values or belongs to an old identity, you may need the courage to change direction. Either way, the goal is not to be driven by impulse. The goal is to be guided by alignment. This is also where community can matter. When motivation fades, isolation magnifies discouragement. We start believing we are the only ones struggling. We compare our private difficulty to someone else's public progress. We assume everyone else has more discipline, more clarity, more confidence, more support. But most people who are building something meaningful face unseen resistance. They have days when they doubt themselves. They have seasons when progress feels slow. They have moments when they wonder if the effort matters. The right support can help us remember what is true when our emotions are loud. Support may come from a coach, mentor, friend, group, counselor, partner, community, or even a structured practice that helps us stay honest. We are not meant to do every meaningful thing alone. Sometimes continuing requires borrowing strength from a relationship or a rhythm until our own strength returns. There is no shame in needing support. In fact, support is often a sign that we are taking the journey seriously. If something matters, it deserves structure. It deserves encouragement. It deserves accountability that is compassionate rather than condemning. Accountability is not someone standing over us with judgment. At its best, accountability is someone helping us remember who we said we wanted to become. As we think about motivation, we also need to talk about rest. Some people do not need to push harder, they need to recover. The culture around personal growth can sometimes make people feel guilty for being tired. But rest is not the enemy of purpose. Rest can be part of purpose. A rested person often has clearer judgment, deeper patience, better creativity, and more emotional resilience. If the only way you can pursue a goal is by destroying your health, relationships, or peace, then something about the approach needs attention. The key is learning the difference between restorative rest and avoidant escape. Rest returns us to life more whole. Avoidance pulls us away from life and usually leaves the deeper issue waiting. Rest says, I need renewal so I can continue. Avoidance says, I do not want to face this. Both may look like stopping for a while, but they are not the same in spirit. One supports the journey, the other postpones it. When motivation fades, we need a gentle but honest conversation with ourselves. We need to ask, am I tired, afraid, discouraged, misaligned, unsupported, impatient, or simply in the ordinary middle of the process? The answer matters because each condition calls for a different response. Tired may need rest. Afraid may need courage and support. Discouraged may need perspective. Misaligned may need reevaluation. Unsupported may need community. Impatient may need trust in the process. The ordinary middle may simply need faithful continuation. The ordinary middle is often the hardest part. Beginnings have energy. Endings have celebration. The middle has repetition. The middle is where the work becomes real. The middle is where we learn whether we are committed only to the feeling of beginning or also to the process of becoming. It is where identity is formed, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the repeated choice to return. If you are in the middle of something right now, I want to encourage you not to despise that place. The middle may feel slow, but it is doing work in you. It is teaching patience, resilience, humility, endurance, and trust. It is revealing what needs support. It is showing you which expectations were unrealistic and which values are strong enough to keep guiding you. The middle may not be glamorous, but it is often sacred ground to growth. As we close this episode, I want to invite you into a simple reflection. Think about one area where your motivation has faded. It may be a goal, a practice, a relationship, a healing process, a creative project, or a personal change you began with hope, but now struggle to continue. Ask yourself, does this still matter to me? If the answer is yes, ask, what smaller, more sustainable rhythm would help me continue? Then ask, what support or adjustment do I need so this does not depend entirely on motivation? Finally, choose one return step. Not a dramatic comeback, not a huge promise, just one return step. Open the document, take the walk, make the call, pray again, review the plan, apologize, clean the small space, schedule the appointment, begin the next small action. Let the return count. Because the journey toward purpose is not measured only by how strongly you begin, it is also measured by how faithfully you return. Motivation may fade, but meaning can remain. Excitement may soften, but commitment can deepen. The path may become ordinary, but ordinary steps can still carry you somewhere beautiful. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Begin Purpose podcast. In our next episode, we will continue this journey by exploring what it means to realign after drifting, how to recognize when you have moved away from your values, your identity, or your purpose, and how to come back without shame. Until then, remember this: fading motivation is not the end of your story. It may simply be the moment your purpose is asking for a deeper kind of commitment. This is Begin Purpose, and today is a good day to return to what matters.